guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, "Neighbor torched my home because my grass was too tall. Don't mess with my property." My wife and I live a pretty happy life together. We have been happily married for several years, bought our first house together, and 3 years ago we introduced our daughter Maddie to the world. We lived in a quiet neighborhood, which was good for us since we wanted to raise our daughter in a safe environment. We were on a first-name basis with all of neighbors and they were always friendly to us. Our next-door neighbor, Tom, was deemed as the crazy neighbor of the area, with many people have stories of his antics. Although he seemed a bit hyperactive, he was always nice to my family and I and had never caused us any disturbances. There were no fences around our house, or most of the properties in the neighborhood. This caused some of the neighbors to share part of their lawns, or yards overlapping. My wife and I kept up with the maintenance and cosmetics of the house if you will, and had gardeners over every 2 weeks in order to cut the grass, clip back the bushes, etc. Every now and then the gardeners missed a week, which was really no big deal as I owned a lawnmower and my wife enjoyed working in our garden. However, usually they let us know they would not be coming. Well, one month they missed 2 weeks, and our grass was starting to overgrow. I had been meaning to mow it, but my wife and I had just been so busy with both of us working and taking care of our daughter that it just was not happening. I would consider myself a pretty good neighbor, and although my yard was starting to look a little bit unkept, I didn't think that it would cause any chaos in the neighborhood. Boy, I was sure wrong. Not only did it cause chaos with my neighbor, my unkept grass also caused destruction and devastation. Tom from next door lit my house on fire while my daughter and I were in it. Yes, over the unkept grass. Here is a little backstory on how it led up to this, which is still a shock to me. After the gardeners had missed several weeks and I was too busy to mow the grass, I admit the grass was starting to look unkept. My neighbor, Tom, was also sure to bring it to my attention one day when I was coming home from work. "Tom. Hey. Are you going to cut your grass anytime soon? It is starting to look like a bum life there." Me. "Oh yes, I am going to do it this weekend, been pretty busy." After this brief interaction, he just hummed and walked inside his house. While some people would be offended at this interaction, Tom was known for being odd, crazy, and well, to be quite honest, a little socially awkward. But he was a nice guy from what I have seen, and his tone seemed playful, so I just figured it was some friendly neighbor banter. When the weekend rolled around, my wife ended up having to pick an extra shift at work. So, while I was at home and not working, I was watching over and spending time with my daughter. I decided that mowing the lawn could wait another day or two, while I watched over my daughter. The fact that I was not mowing my lawn right on the dot when I said I would, enraged Mr. Tom enough to smash my windows, and pour gasoline on my kitchen and light it on fire. I was sitting in the living room with my daughter, when all of a sudden, I hear a huge crashing sound and glass shattering. "Tom. You have got about 10 seconds to come outside." I was so confused, I thought someone was breaking into the house at first. I could hear someone running away, so I picked up my daughter quickly and ran to her room. While I was running past the kitchen though, I saw Tom running away from my house. I was even more confused. But I felt like my daughter's safety was at hand, so I just ran to her room to call 911. I did not have time to figure out what was happening, I just wanted to make sure my daughter was safe. Imagine my surprise though that while on the phone with 911, I began to smell something burning. And guess what? It was my house. Tom had come back and poured an entire gas can be full of gasoline all over my kitchen floor, and then proceeded to light the room on fire. Luckily, my daughter's room was right next to the backyard, and I was able to escape from the backyard door and ran over to another neighbor's house, who was on her porch witnessing everything. I had told her what had happened, and she had told me her son and another neighbor had called 911 because they thought there was a fight. It was a devastating sight when the police showed up. The house had been completely destroyed and the fire had even caused some damage to my other neighbor's yard. I had to call my wife and let her know what had happened, and luckily her parents are letting us stay with them until everything gets sorted out or rebuilt. It is all still up in the air. Tom did actually admit to the police right then and there that it was him who started the fire, and he even admitted it was because I was being a reckless neighbor by not having my grass cut. I was surprised to learn that Tom actually had a lengthy criminal record and was considered an armed and dangerous person. While yes, he did seem like he had a screw loose in the head, he never seemed violent up until this interaction with him. Because Tom turned himself into the police and was completely honest with them about what he did and why he did it, they were able to arrest him and sentence him to jail. My neighbor actually has a security camera that caught part of the whole ordeal, and we were able to use that in court as well. Tom ended up receiving a sentence of about 3 years, which does not seem long enough for what he did. I think about what I would have done if my daughter were in another room. Would I have been able to get to her? Anyways, I am hoping that Tom is not allowed back into his house or the neighborhood after his release from prison, but we are just taking everything one day at a time. The next story is titled, The Homeowners Association. I'd like to be able to say that I'm not sure if I'm more scared or upset about what's been happening lately. I'd be in utter denial though if I were to act like it was anything other than the former at this point. My husband and we worked so damn hard to be able to save enough money to afford a house. We had to sacrifice, to miss out on concerts, travel, and all those other luxuries. However, it was finally all going to pay off. We'd picked out a lovely house in a nice suburb not too far outside of the city. The price was reasonable, the neighbors seemed nice, and the great schools in the area were a major plus. I could see us raising a family together here, growing old together. And now this. It was about 3 months after we moved in when it began. All of a sudden, one of our neighbors, the family who lived in the house across the street from us, moved out. We didn't think too much of it at first, other than feeling a bit bummed about it. My husband and I had spent a couple of evenings enjoying a few glasses of wine with that couple, and we'd thought we were getting on pretty well. They didn't even mention anything about it to us, before it happened. Perhaps we simply weren't as close as we thought. However, they were only the first. Over the course of the next 2 months or so, more and more of the people in our neighborhood moved away. It happened so suddenly with some, that neither my husband nor I even glimpsed a moving truck before the house was seemingly emptied. At its peak, we had 3 different families move out 3 days in a row. It was a bit unnerving to say the least. We couldn't make any sense of it. As far as we could figure out, there wasn't anything wrong with the area that would warrant these sudden moves. And believe me, we checked. The weirdest thing about it though, was that none of the houses went on sale. Despite being completely empty of any sort of habitation, no for sale sign ever appeared in any of their lawns, and the realtor websites remained barren of listings for our area. So, either the families didn't sell the homes despite moving out, or they were bought up before they had even left. We weren't the only ones worried about it either. The old man who lived in the house to the left of ours even nervously joked with my husband one time that aliens had to be involved somehow, though my husband said it was hard to tell if he was actually joking, or simply trying to convince himself that he was only joking. The next day he was gone as well. Soon enough, our house was the only one left in the neighborhood with anyone living in it. At least, that's what it seemed like at first. It wasn't exactly pleasant, living in a neighborhood that was completely devoid of anyone else. It was quiet, so very quiet. My husband and I worried that we might have to be concerned about a rise in crime. Break-ins, squatters, and the like. As far as we could tell, nothing particularly criminal ever happened though. At some point, we didn't even get people walking or driving through our neighborhood anymore. It was like living in a ghost town. In the end, we just had to make the most of it. We'd sunk most of our savings into our new home, and we definitely would be losing out if we tried to move out as well. Besides, if there was something actually wrong with the area that justified all the sudden moves, it didn't seem to be affecting our home in any way. It was easier to just ignore it and get on with our lives. We both have had to deal with far worse in regard to moving into a new home, and it wasn't like it could last forever. As I mentioned before, this is a very nice neighborhood. We were sure the homes wouldn't remain unoccupied for long. Turns out we were actually wrong about that, at least in part anyway. The homes weren't unoccupied. It was little things at first. Almost unnoticeable really. However, after months of living in a neighborhood empty of any other people, these sorts of things start to stand out to you. The curtains would shift slightly in the windows sometimes as I drove past on the way to or from work, as if someone had just pulled them closed in a hurry. At night, there would sometimes be a subtle glow coming from 1 or 2 of the windows in one of the homes, as if there was a light on somewhere further into the house. One day, my husband told me he swore he could hear several people talking somewhere, but they stopped before he could figure out where it was coming from. On another day, I myself was certain I'd heard a door slamming somewhere on the next street over. Then came the bigger things. The far more worrisome things. One evening, I saw on my way home from work that the front door to every single house in the neighborhood, other than ours, was wide open. I hurried home, unable to work up the nerve to investigate. My husband tried to peek inside one of them sometime later after he'd gotten home. However, when he got closer to one of the doors, the angry barking of a rather large-sounding dog, coming from inside the house, sent him running back home as quick as can be. He told me that the dog had chased him all the way to our front door, but I was watching through the window the whole time and I never saw a dog. The doors stayed open for the rest of the night, only to close at some point after both my husband and I had fallen asleep. On another night, my husband and I were roused from sleep by a light streaming in through our window and some sort of commotion coming from outside. We looked out of our bedroom window to find that a house across the street from us and down the way a bit was lit up like Christmas. It was like they were having some sort of party. However, certain things were distinctly off. There were clearly many people present. We were certain from the racket that they were making. However, like usual, there wasn't a single car in the driveway or anywhere else on the street. There was a strange, discordant sort of music coming in from inside, as well as the loud, jovial voices of countless people, neither of which could be made sense of over the volume of the other. The curtains were drawn, but we could see the figures of people moving inside. Only, they passed by the windows in a brief flicker of rapid movement, as if everyone inside was sprinting about the house as fast as they could. The lights were somehow getting even brighter, and the noise even louder. My husband left to go and get his phone to call the police while I continued to watch. It got brighter and louder, and brighter and louder. It was as if a sun had descended onto our street. The people inside sounded like they were screaming. Then, all of a sudden, the lights cut out and the voices went silent all at once, as if a fuse somewhere in the house had blown. I squinted in the sudden darkness as my husband asked me what happened in a hushed whisper. The lights had burned afterimages into my vision, and I needed a moment of blinking and rubbing at my eyes to see properly. The house was dark and still, though it didn't feel empty. All the curtains were now open. It was too dark to see anything inside, but I felt certain that there were countless gazes focused outwards on our house. On me. My husband had just gotten to his phone, but I convinced him not to go through with calling the police. There was no more light or sound coming from anywhere on our street for the rest of that night. I didn't get much of any more sleep all the same. Those are only examples of the many other strange goings-on that occurred around our neighborhood during that time. All of which took place without us catching sight of a single person, though we saw plenty that suggested that there should be other people here. Throughout all of this, we had been trying desperately to get in contact with any of the people who used to live here, or still did for all we knew. We hoped that someone would be able to shed some light on what was going on. We hadn't exactly gotten many phone numbers in the short time we'd been living here before people had started leaving, and most were no longer in service. Eventually, we were able to get in contact with someone, but what information we could get out of him only raised more questions. Evidently, he'd received an anonymous offer to purchase his home for triple its value. The only stipulation being that he had to move out immediately, within a day if possible. He was surprised to hear that we were still living here, as he was under the impression that everyone else in the neighborhood had received a similar offer. We, of course, hadn't heard anything about any offers. However, it wasn't long after that we received a message of a different sort. My husband and I woke one morning to find a piece of what could only be described as parchment stuck to our front door. Not with a conventional sort of adhesive, mind you, but with the same sort of wax one might use to seal a letter. As had become the norm, we hadn't caught even the slightest glimpse of who had posted it there. However, the wax was still warm and had yet to fully dry, so it couldn't have been there for long. As far as what was written on it though, the parchment was a notice informing us, the residents, of the formation of a homeowners association for our neighborhood. With this new organization's formation would come several regulations that all residents were required to follow. As far as what these regulations were, it was mostly all pretty standard stuff that my husband and I were doing already. Keeping the lawn trimmed, not leaving garbage strewn about the front porch, raking leaves. That sort of thing. However, there were two regulations towards the end of the list that were particularly abnormal. All residents were now required to paint the south-facing sides of their homes black as soon as possible, and now were required to bury 30 pounds of raw meat in their backyard on the third day of every month. We didn't put much thought into simply ignoring these regulations. I mean, they had to be a joke, right? Even after waking one morning to find that all the other homes in the neighborhood were sporting a fresh new coat of black paint on one of their sides, we stubbornly refused to comply. All the stress from the new strangeness of our neighborhood had come to a head. This was going to be our final straw, and we were going to stick to our guns. I take it that someone didn't like that too much. Yesterday, about a week after we received the first notice, we arrived home from work to find a new notice attached to our door. It was much the same as the first, however there were some additions made to the end in dripping, dark red ink. It was apparently a message from the sender, noting that he'd seen we were having difficulties complying with the new regulations. As such, he decided to help us out a bit. He also added that the deadline for fully complying was by the end of the week, and that, if he didn't notice a change soon, there would be consequences. The dead part of deadline had been carved into the paper with an added force that seemed clearly intentional. Our front door was unlocked, and we had most definitely not left it that way. Hesitantly, my husband pushed open the door, his other hand tightly clutching my own for support. The first one that caught my eye was the crow nailed to the wall just above a picture of my husband and I, blood leaking out of it and dripping down the photo frame. Glancing down the hallway and up the stairs, I saw several smaller animals nailed to the walls. A couple of rabbits, a seagull, 2 or 3 small rodents. The trail ended in our bedroom with a bisected raccoon, 1/2 for each of our pillows. I didn't bother weighing all of the corpses before burying them in the backyard, but I was plenty sure they would end up weighing about 30 pounds. My husband is at the store now, buying black paint and some ground beef for the next month, and I'm typing this up as I take a break from trying to get the bloodstains out of the wallpaper. Strangely enough, it isn't what the association did to our home that's really scaring me. Or the fact that the police and any realtor we talk to refuse to acknowledge that our neighborhood exists and won't even take our calls anymore. It's wondering what other, new regulations the homeowners association might put in place in the future. Thanks for listening.